Hello everybody, my name is Tatьяна. I'm a lecturer at the School of Foreign Languages at National Research University Higher School of Economics, and I'm going to give you a series of webinars on language teachers' professional skill, a very important language teacher's professional skill, which is teacher feedback, which we give to our students when assessing their learning. And this is a series of webinars within the course, Teaching English Through English, and welcome. Now, in this course, or in this series of webinars, we understand feedback as a language, as the information that teachers share with their learning share with their learners about their learning. And I would like to start off by asking you, why is it essential to give feedback to our learners? What are the functions of our feedback? I would really like to know your opinion before we start, so could you please share it with me in the comment section? Why is it so important to share the information with our students about their learning? I'm waiting for your answers. What are the functions of feedback? All right, good evening, hello. All right, while we are thinking of different reasons why it's important to give feedback to our students, I will also ask you to think of your own experience of receiving as learners and giving as teachers feedback as a part of teaching, and think whether it was a positive or negative experience and what made this experience positive or negative, okay? We're going to talk about it very soon, but now I already have some answers. So, for example, Zhenya Chudnova says that it's important that our students know what they do well and what they do not very well. Thank you so much, fair enough. When preparing for the exams, that's what Ekaterina Языкова says, and definitely. But why is it important in particular when preparing for exams, and what type of feedback we might want to give our students when prepare for exams? Thank you. It helps to understand what they have understood. Absolutely. It helps our learners be aware of where they are, right, when it comes to their learning. Okay, thank you so much. To know how well we work as teachers and how well they work as students probably, right? Why it's important? Because when working with our students, we might always make some conclusions about what they do right, what they do wrong, but it's also very important to deliver that information to our students, right? Thank you so much. So I have some functions or some benefits of using, of giving feedback to our students, and one of them is to motivate students. Do you agree? Do you agree that feedback can be used as an effective tool to motivate our students? Do you have maybe any experience of being motivated as a learner thanks to very good feedback that you receive from your received from your teachers? Now, we can obviously motivate our students by giving them praise, right? Which is one type of feedback, right? We can praise our students, and this is feedback. But what are other ways of using feedback to motivate our learners? We can give them praise. We can say, good job, well done. This is something that is particularly good about your assignment. We might also give them constructive criticism, right? Which can also, if delivered in a proper way, be motivating. And we're going to talk about it very soon, right? And another way to motivate our students is actually to give them a little action plan, right? To say, all right, this is what is particularly good about your work, right? This is where you can be, and this is what can be done for you to get from here to here, right? So definitely feedback can be used as a great motivating tool when working with our learners, right? Teacher feedback. Now, feedback, I've already mentioned that we can use feedback to give our learners a little action plan, what they can do to improve, right? And therefore we can use feedback to guide our learners, right? Or when we work, I think it has already been mentioned, exam preparation has already been mentioned, right? So when we want to, when we're preparing our learners for the exam and we know that these are their strengths, these are their weaknesses, and in order to get, and for example, students tend to focus more on the things that they're doing great, right? And actually avoid sometimes doing the things that they're not particularly keen on, right? So we can guide our students, we can redirect their attention from one aspect of learning to another. And I can't think of any other way of doing it apart from actually talking to our students, right? We might do it very well in an indirect way, right? In the form of a conversation. But yeah, this is another function of giving feedback to our learners. When giving feedback to our learners, we might also develop their learning autonomy, right? Do you agree? We might let them know very explicitly, and this is what you have already mentioned in the beginning. You mentioned at the beginning of our webinar, we can inform them of what they're doing well, what they still need to work on, right? And this is again feedback. Feedback can be used as a way to communicate our ideas about students' learning to them. We can monitor their progress, obviously, by commenting on the strengths and the weaknesses when it comes to them doing this or that assignment. And we can use feedback to correct their mistakes, and not only mistakes, but also their learning strategies, right? So we can use it to, again, direct their learning behavior a little bit, correct them, and giving them all the resources needed to get them to self-correct, right? And finally, we can use feedback to teach our learners, right? Because if we think of a feedback as a little, let's say, as a commentary which we make when assessing our learners, right? When conducting formative assessment, we might actually share knowledge with our students. But we are thinking, when I'm talking about feedback in this way, I'm obviously thinking about the foreign language classroom, which is taught entirely in English and which is and which is taught by respecting and following the principles of communicative language teaching, right? In which target language is also used as a means of instruction, and the communication between learners and teachers is used as this environment, right? Environment which stimulates learning and encourages our learners. Now, sorry for me maybe talking a bit too much right now. The first webinar is just me introducing you to the topic of feedback, and later on in our subsequent sessions we're actually going to acquire different strategies of delivering feedback to our learners and correcting their mistakes, mainly in speaking. And you will receive multiple tasks, and you will receive a chance to use those strategies that I'll share with you, and we will correct them and we will talk about them together. So our subsequent sessions will be more practice oriented. Today is just a little introduction, and I'm waiting for your comments about your experience of giving and receiving feedback, because I'm really very curious about what you think and that matter. Now, you have probably already seen or come across these two types of assessment when it comes to assessing student learning, right? Assessment of learning and assessment for learning. Now, when we think of feedback, of using teacher feedback to monitor, shape student learning, to encourage our learners, to guide them, to correct them and teach them, what type of assessment are we talking about? What type of assessment do we have in our mind? Assessment of learning or assessment for learning? When we want to have this ongoing conversation, right, with our learners, telling them what they're doing great, what they still need to work on, maybe sharing some strategies, some tricks of how they can improve their learning, giving them some incentives, right, stimulate our learners. What type of assessment is that? This is obviously assessment. Is it assessment of learning? You probably know what assessment of learning is, right? This is the type of assessment which we, very good, I already see correct answers. Жанна Фомина, Татьяна Поздеева. This is definitely assessment for learning, right? Assessment for learning is an ongoing assessment which we conduct in order to monitor student learning, and an important part of this type of assessment is giving feedback, right? Because there is no point in conducting assessment for learning if we do not inform our learners of the results of our assessment procedures, right? But just in case, I'll go back very quickly to assessment of learning, right? As opposed to assessment for learning. This is that type of assessment which we conduct at the end of a learning period, for example, a term, a semester, a school year, just to draw a bottom line, right? Just to let our students know, okay, where they are by the end of the learning period, right? But definitely, feedback matters particularly when it comes to assessment for learning or formative assessment. Now, in the beginning of our lecture, I see so many answers for you. Definitely, assessment for learning. Very good. Now, in the beginning of our webinar, if you remember, I asked you to think about your experience of coming across feedback, right? Can you think of, right now, of positive feedback, of very good feedback that you've ever witnessed or maybe given to your learners? What makes good feedback? What is your opinion? What makes good feedback. Okay, Alexander, it's more an encouragement, right, in primary school? Definitely. Well, when it comes to primary school students, probably if we start giving them an action plan, that might be a bit overwhelming for them, right? They might not really know what to do. So when it comes to especially to primary school, to kids, that's definitely encouragement, first of all, right? But still we can guide them in a way, right? Or we can maybe challenge them in a way. We can, through feedback, we can make learning more interesting, right, to them, challenging. Okay, ask questions about what he can do, what he can do, and how the student does it better. So, Ekaterina, again, языко, thank you so much. Yes, we can ask questions, right? This is one of the feedback strategies, to ask questions, to promote self-correction, self-assessment, and actually to promote something that I have already mentioned, to promote learner autonomy, right? To help students learn how to self-reflect upon their learning, and given the modern paradigm of education, this is particularly important. Thank you so much, Ekaterina. Good motivation. Criteria, Жанна, Femina, criteria. Do you mean making students aware of the criteria that we use when assessing them, and like using feedback to remind them of the criteria, right? And like setting criteria? Possibly, very good idea, actually. Thank you so much. Okay, the best feedback ever is an improvement and trying their best even if they don't succeed. Okay, you mean motivating them, right, Alexander? Motivating them even if they don't succeed. And again, if we think of an individual approach to our learners and modern paradigm, right, of education and of shaping our learning, we might want to be facilitators, right, to our learners, right, and we might want to use feedback to let our students know that we will always be there for them, right? We are there to support them, but they need to be aware of, they need to be independent learners, and we are there to help them, to assist them. And this is another way, or another reason why feedback is particularly important. Thank you so much for your answers. Peer evaluating with, okay, Жанна, yeah, peer evaluating with criteria, and as a result of peer evaluating with the criteria, we do what? We deliver feedback. Now, feedback can be seen as the information that a teacher delivers to students as a result of assessing their learning, but actually feedback can be delivered by peers, right? To the to a student by their peers and by themselves even. Some papers single out this type of feedback which is delivered to a student by themselves. Self-feedback and peer feedback, right? And teacher feedback. Thank you so much. Thanks to achieve their goals, absolutely, giving them an action plan. Thank you so much for such a great brainstorm. Okay. Okay. Now, I have done some literature review into the characteristics of effective teacher feedback, and today I would like to share the results of my research with you. So, Professor Dylan Williams from UCL University singled out two types of feedback: ego-involving feedback and task-involving feedback. Now, let me give you two examples. John. Imagine we have the student John who has just submitted their piece of writing, and they did pretty well. We can't deny this fact. They did well. one type of feedback that I might want to deliver to John: John, you're so smart, you're such an amazing learner, you're so gifted, you're such a talented writer, well done, good student. Another type of feedback that I might want to give to John on the very same piece of writing will be: John, this writing is really very strong. It lived up to the standard. Your strengths are the following. You achieved your aims, target readers fully informed. You've used a wide range of linking devices, and your essay is particularly accurate when it comes to grammar and vocabulary. Now, which example of feedback, the first one or the second one, is ego involving? When I say, John, good boy, good student, you're so talented, you're the smartest boy in this class. Or, John, this task is very well written. It's a very strong piece of writing. Obviously, the first type of feedback is ego involving, and research shows that this is something that does not only contribute to student learning, but might actually impede student learning. And researchers suggest that we stay away from commenting on students' personal characteristics, but rather focus on the task itself, okay? So one of the characteristics of effective feedback that I would like to share with you today is the fact that our feedback should be task involving. Thank you so much, definitely. It is feedback number 1. Thank you for your responses. Now, another characteristic of an effective feedback, which I would like to share with you, is that feedback should be encouraging. You might have already had a sneaky look on my next slide. So feedback, and this is what Alexandra has already mentioned, right? Feedback should be encouraging. Now, what can we do to make our feedback encouraging? How can we make the feedback that we give to our learners encouraging? Can you think of maybe some? Okay, yeah, Alexandra, something in the middle would be great. Yes, absolutely. But I would still suggest that we focus primarily on the task and on the progress, rather than on the personal characteristics of the learner. This is what research says. Thank you so much, but I do agree that sometimes we actually want to comment on like personal strengths of the learner, which help them to succeed in their learning. I definitely agree with you. All right, so how can we make feedback encouraging? Can you remember the example of feedback I gave John? What did I start with? I started with addressing him by name, right? So I said John, and which made feedback quite personalized, right? Student might making it positive, definitely. Students should understand that this feedback actually is addressed to them, because sometimes, and in our following webinars, we will actually analyze the examples of real feedback given to by teachers to their students on different types of assessment, and we're going to see all sorts of feedback, and we're actually going to comment on them and evaluate them. But yeah, we want our students understand that we thought about them and about their task in particular. We don't want this feedback to look very general and generic. Sometimes when we give comments which are too general and that can be actually applied to all sorts of, all different pieces of writing, students do not feel that we actually looked through their work thoroughly and actually considered their and put thought into analyzing their learning and thinking of the ways of how to help them in particular, and this can actually be very demotivating. So we want to make our feedback personalized, definitely polite and respectful. I'm not going to give you the examples of disrespectful feedback, but you might, I think most of you can think of something like that. You might have witnessed that at school, for example, or at a driving classes. This is something that I hear a lot from teachers I work with. The most demotivating feedback you can ever receive might be received in your driving classes. I've been there, so I know. So it might include some commentary on positive aspects, right? It might include, and this is what makes feedback quite motivating, right? Always start with something that a person did correctly. I do totally agree with you, Alexander. This is probably something that we want to start off, right? The point of a departure will be something that our student did particularly well. Now, however, well, I would say that no matter what type of writing it is, we are more likely to find something to praise our student for. I mean, we might always find some strengths about this piece of writing. But sometimes, it is rather a rare occasion, but sometimes we clearly see that a student didn't put enough effort into that piece of work. Is it a good idea then to start with something positive, with, let's say, praise? Well, we should still start our feedback with something positive, but we should not lie, obviously. We should not comment on something that is not there, right? We should, I will share some tips, some tricks with you of how we can do that, right? We'll have personal examples of disrespectful feedback. I know. We will, share it in the comment section. Please share it, and I will share some of my examples. And it can be an interesting topic to discuss. So, includes commentary on positive aspects of the work and student progress. Now, when there is nothing to comment on when it comes to nothing positive to comment on when it comes to a certain piece of writing of our student, we might think of maybe the progress, right, that they have made, or maybe this piece of writing doesn't yet live up to the standard, but maybe we can trace some improvement, right? And this is something that we might also comment on to start from something positive, right? Now, this is something that I have already mentioned, right? What if there is nothing, what if we see clearly that our student, John, for example, didn't put enough effort into that piece of work, piece of writing, or, I don't know, the monologue that he delivered in class? Should we start our feedback with saying, good job overall, John? Should we? Probably no, probably not. What should we say then? That will be my question to you. I will go over other slides, but I would be very interested in seeing what you guys might suggest. What should I do? I have this student, John. He clearly didn't do very well, but I should probably start with something positive. What should I start my feedback with? But anyway, we don't want to lie, right? We don't want to mislead our learners. What if they believe that this is something that they did pretty well if they did not, right? We should stay polite and respectful, being very honest at the same time, right, about their progress. You can say something like, oh, praise the handwriting. Maybe this can be something to praise them for, right? Yeah, we can say that is a fair attempt at the writing, which, however, right, does not yet or live up to the standard. So we can start saying that this is a fair, this is a decent attempt at the writing, right? Therefore, saying that this is not actually the piece of writing that is expected, right? At the end, ask other students to give peer feedback. Yeah, definitely, it's a good idea to ask our other students to give peer feedback. But anyway, our students still wait for some feedback from their teacher as well, right? Yeah, but we might see what other people might notice about their piece of writing, for example, right? And yeah, think of how we can incorporate it into our feedback, right? Next time it will be better. This is, by the way, a very good very good strategy that we can take. We can say that, all right, right now, maybe this is not where it is supposed to be, but, and again, with using that little action plan, right, which we mentioned in the very beginning, we can show them what can be done, and next time, I'm sure, show them that you're sure, right, that you're there, you support them. It will be better, right, or it will be a bit more successful. You can do it, absolutely, providing that encouragement. Yes, very good. Thank you for at least trying, right? A very good a very good strategy, right? Commenting on the attempt at doing that task without saying that this is a very successful actually piece of writing, but you attempted, right? And in order to bring it to where we all want it to be, you need to focus on this, and this. So yeah, definitely we can make some references for further writing, right? So we can suggest some tips for the makeover and ask for a makeover, saying that I believe in you, not explicitly, but letting our student know that we believe in them and we know that they can do it much better. And here are some tips of how you can do it. Now, Alexander has already mentioned, right, that our feedback should probably start with something positive, and you probably are all familiar with the concept of sandwich, right, when it comes to teacher, to any feedback, actually in business and communication and like all sorts of communication, right, and in learning as well. So we start our feedback with something positive. Then we might have something like the most delicious, right? Constructive criticism, like something which is more interesting maybe, right? Like constructive criticism and an action plan, right? And positive feedback, which is again a link to our students' further writing. Pieces of writing which we are looking forward to, right? Now, how can we make our criticism, which might be an inevitable part of our feedback, how can we make it constructive? So constructive is actually intended to help, right? constructive. What are the ways of making it constructive? Yes? First of all, it should be specific. Now, so constructive feedback, constructive criticism is helpful criticism, right? When I say, good job overall, John, but unfortunately poor grammar. Is it specific? John, you should work on your grammar. Is it helpful? It's obviously not very helpful because, all right, pretty much everybody, every learner, right, if they're not C1 or C2 level, and even at those levels, have some grammar to work on, right? So it might not be very helpful, right? So we want our feedback to be specific. What particular should John focus on? What particular rules should he, or verb use, ways of using a verb, should our learner focus on? Constructive feedback is there more to point out some mistakes. Yeah, pointing out some mistakes. Absolutely, Alexandra. Pointing out some areas for improvement, right? And it should be pretty specific. Be specific. What particular should our learner focus on? Grammar is too general. Vocabulary is too general. And maybe again, how. Not only what, but also how they can do that, right? It should be explicit. There are some areas for you for improvement, right? But overall, it's pretty good. What are the areas, right? We should be very explicit in order to make our feedback more helpful, right? It includes an action plan. It is very important for our learner to know what their strengths and weaknesses are, but it is also very important to know what can be done to improve, right? And the more specific and explicit it is, the better. Again, we're going to look at some examples of real feedback and try to figure out whether it's specific enough, helpful enough, explicit enough. Okay, right now just a little intro. What can be done to improve, right? Now, going back to that piece of writing where it was very hard to find something to praise our student for, we obviously might expect a lot of mistakes in that piece of writing, right? Do you agree? A lot of mistakes. Now, if this is a general, let's say, essay, for example, that our learner is writing in the middle of a term, especially maybe to practice a certain language pattern. For example, we studied how to use past simple a couple of classes ago, and then I gave them in the writing section, we had this task to write an essay about how I spent my last summer. I'm asking them to do that, and our student makes quite a lot of mistakes in our piece of writing, especially after summer holidays, including the mistakes on the use of past simple, which has been the focus of our lessons so far. Now, do we want to pick up on every single inaccuracy in our student writing if there are too many of them? Sometimes it might not be a good idea, because this is something that can make our, that can actually overwhelm our learner and demotivate them. Now, if we're preparing our student for an exam, and these are the last stages of preparation, and our task is actually to let them know what to expect, right? This is when we might actually want to pick up on everything. But if this is not the exam class, but just I don't know, the 7th grade, right? Or the 6th grade. Our students are just acquiring those writing skills, right? We might want to be selective. We might want to focus only on the things that are particularly important to be highlighted for this particular, in this particular piece of writing, and like for this particular learner, right? Knowing their learning background, their strengths and weaknesses, because we want their attention to be focused on those areas of improvement too, right? The more areas we are outlined, the harder it is for them to focus, right? So we might be really selective, right? It can be a great strategy. Now, I see some very nice comments. Sometimes these students even don't think that making mistakes is a part of a success. Again, thank you so much, Alexander. And this is something that we also want to let our students know, and we can do it actually through the feedback we give to our learners, right? Address their mistakes in a way that will help our students understand that making mistakes is okay. Not working on your mistakes and not putting effort into improving is not okay, but making mistakes is actually okay, and like admitting mistakes and being aware of your mistakes is actually the first step for success. I agree. Thank you so much. We should focus on main mistakes. Exactly, Victor. We should focus on main mistakes, and actually it takes quite a lot of professional thinking, right? And being able to select, being able to be selective when it comes to evaluating the progress and the learning of different students in our classroom, right? And for different students, we might want to focus on different things, right? Taking into account their strengths, their weaknesses, their particular problem areas, right? If we want to take that individual approach and make our teaching learner-centered, right? And personalized. This is one of, I think we've mentioned it, right? When talking about the ways of how we can make our feedback motivating, right? We want to create this atmosphere in which we communicate with our learners, right? We want to set up this ongoing conversation between us and our learners, right? To help them open up to us a little bit, right? And if we are able to do that, they can, instead of building up that wall, right, of resistance, they can actually be more open and more receptive, right, when it comes to us making our suggestions, right, commenting on their learning and like trying to help them improve. Okay, some students don't take part in lessons not to make any mistakes. They keep silence. Absolutely. This is actually, Olga, a very good point. Feedback can be particularly important and useful when it comes to students who are a little bit shy and are afraid to participate in class and interact with other learners and with us, right? They might be really very shy, they might be afraid of making mistakes, and we can actually give feedback. We can write little comments, little messages to our students in their copybooks, right, or like on their pieces of writing, to help them know that we know they can do that. We notice the things that they can do well, and we're there for them, even though they're a bit reserved right for now, right? Okay, now How do we make our feedback personalized? Well, obviously, we can address our student by their name, right? John, good job. And then be more specific, right? And focus on the task per se. Another very good strategy, and we're going to practice it in one of our further seminars, is to refer to our students' further works. Now, sometimes it happens when there is not much to be said about a particular piece of writing, right? Maybe because we clearly again see that there hasn't been much effort put into their work, or our student might actually might have done the very same mistakes which they tend to make, right? So we see that they haven't maybe grown much over the kind of like past over the past several pieces of, well, writing which they have submitted recently. So we might actually refer to their previous work experience of writing, right, to their previous work, and create those links. This works incredibly for our students to understand that their learning matters, and we adopt this individualistic approach. We treat them not as a whole class, not only as a whole class, but their learning, their progress, their success, and their maybe the difficulties that they're experiencing matter to us, right? So we can sometimes compare and comment on the progress, right? We can say, when it comes to this aspect of writing, I remember the work. Do you remember the work you submitted 3 weeks ago? See how good it is now when it comes to this particular aspect of writing, right? Putting smile can be a very good way to motivate our learners. Yeah, smiley faces. Again, we should avoid vague and general comments. This is, again, going back to something that we have already mentioned, right? Our students should not have this impression that we just copy-pasted this comment from one student's piece of writing to another. Good job overall, though you should focus on your grammar. I'm looking forward for a makeover, right? The feedback that can pretty much be used for multiple pieces of writing and might actually seem as okay, right? And we should, again, give feedback in the format of, it can be a good idea. We don't insist here, but that is just our suggestion, that you give your feedback in a format of a short comment, right? Maybe a short message. You might start with their name, you might finish with your name, right? If that's appropriate. This always creates that atmosphere of like ongoing interaction, communication with the teacher, which helps our students be motivated and like open up. Okay, so now I would like you to write down in the comment section what are the features of effective feedback that we have just brainstormed together and I outlined on my slides. You can give those to us through your personal view, or with your personal view on that. Good evening. While you're doing it, I might read something that you have already written in here. We can't avoid mistakes in our native language. Alexandra, yeah, sometimes we make mistakes even in our L1, definitely. We can't avoid mistakes. Teachers can't avoid mistakes too. Mistakes is definitely a part of of learning and a sign that, yeah, we're learning. Like what particularly important is that we work on our mistakes. We we're aware of our mistakes and we make effort to get rid of them, hopefully, in our future pieces of writing or like in our speaking. Okay, I can see being positive, making our feedback constructive, giving specific feedback. Thank you so much. Being positive, very important. Especially, I think this is something that you have already talked about in some of you might have already talked about it in one of your previous webinars, is that when we're teaching the language through a language, we're teaching not only the language per se, like the rules, the vocabulary, language structure, we're also teaching the ways how to interact, how to communicate. Communicative culture, if you want, right? And it is typical of English-speaking educational environment to be to stick to that positive vibes when it comes to interaction of students between each other or between teachers and students. So this is something that we might also want to do in our language classroom, right? To help them create this authentic environment for communication in a foreign language. Task involving, Nika, thank you so much. Being positive, being selective. Irina mentioned, absolutely, we might not want to overwhelm our learners, right? But we might want to focus on the things that are particularly important to be focused on in this particular piece of writing. Okay, if a student has no belief in themselves, I have, right? We might want to let our student know that we are there to help them, yes, and support them, right? We should be fair at the same time. We should find that balance between being honest, being genuine, and being positive, right? Okay, including an action plan, absolutely. This is what makes our feedback constructive and particularly helpful, right? When we say you need to work on your grammar, okay, thank you, I know, most of us actually know, right? Okay, so definitely it should be task involving, encouraging, honest, fair, genuine, well balanced. You remember that little sandwich, right? We should find that nice balance between positive and negative aspects of the work. It should be constructive. In other words, it should be intended. It should intend to help our learners, right? It should be selective, focusing only on the most important aspects of student writing. It should be personalized, preferably delivered in the format of a short message from a teacher to a student. Now, in our further seminars, we are going to have a look at the feedback that language teacher gives to their learners as a language teacher's as a genre of language teachers' professional language use. And we're going to learn or to practice designing those comments when working with different real-life pieces of writing. So now, another question which I would like to touch upon today is, all right, I have this sample of writing and speaking of my student, and I need to give feedback. What is my action plan? What should I think of when setting off to deliver feedback to my students. So where to look for the information, right? A very good point, by the way, Alexandra Pozdnyakova. Do not compare the results between learners. This is a very, very good point. Thank you so much. We do not want to create that rivalry, right, or competition. And not only shouldn't we compare the results between different learners, it is also not a good idea letting our student know, like, this is the best piece of writing in class. You did the best in front of everybody else. Or vice versa. There is nobody in this class who wrote who did this task worse than you did, right? Again, don't go to extremes and don't compare them. Thank you so much for your comments. Now, where should we look for the information to cover in our comment to our learner? So, there is this paper by Hatte and Timberley, The Power of Feedback, in which they suggest that there are 3 questions that we should ask ourselves if we want to, if we are going to deliver feedback to our learner. Our feedback should aim to answer these 3 questions to our student. Where is our student going? Like, what's next? Where are they going? Where should they aim? How are they going? What is, so basically commenting on the progress which is being made, right? So what is where do they aim to get, and how are they going at the moment? Commenting on their progress, and where to next. How are they going at the moment, and what activities need to be undertaken to make this one better, right? So these can be 3 questions. So this can be like a little checklist for you when you're writing or articulating comment to your learner. Just make sure that your comment gives answers to these 3 questions. Just a little idea, a little strategy. What are the types of teacher feedback in the English language classroom? Now we're zooming in a little bit to the main focus of the sequence of these webinars, right? We're now going to talk about teacher feedback, in particular in the English language classroom, and then we will focus even more specifically on giving feedback to our students when assessing their writing and preparing them to take state exams, right? So what are the types of teacher feedback in the foreign language classroom? So one of the types of, one of the ways to divide teacher feedback into to single out different types of teacher feedback can be the moment during the lesson, right? Or during the learning process, right? When we want to deliver our feedback. Now, our feedback can be delivered in class or out of classroom, right? If we're talking about assessing oral performance of our learning, assessing their speaking or assessing their oral contribution to the in-class discussion, it is more likely to be in-class feedback, right? But when it comes to assessing student writing, it is more likely to be out of classroom feedback, right? Because we might write something on their piece of writing, give them back to them, and they will look through it on their own, right? But again, when assessing student writing, we might address their pieces of writing in class too, therefore making it in-class feedback, right? Now, in-class feedback is more likely to be, can be either immediate, right? When somebody contributes to whatever is going on in the classroom and I immediately respond to them, whether it's right, whether it's wrong, or whether they need to change something in their comment, right, to make it more on point, right? Or it can be delayed. I can, let's say, set up a group or pair discussion. They're discussing something in the classroom. I'm monitoring them. I might be taking notes in a sneaky way. And then at the end of a lesson, I'm just address some general issues, right, which I was able to outline when monitoring our learners. Now, again, if I've been monitoring my students doing a free practice speaking activity or follow-on activity after reading something, talking about their experience of, I don't know, traveling by plane, and I have been able to point out all sorts of mistakes, and at the end of the classroom I want to address, I want to give them feedback. Do I want to focus on every single thing I was able to outline? Obviously not. Again, I am switching on my teacher thinking, right? Teacher critical thinking. I'm trying to evaluate all the mistakes I've heard and be selective and focus on the things which are particularly important to be highlighted for this particular type of speaking activity, right? So that will be delayed feedback. Now, when it comes to assessing writing, is it normally in-class assessment, in-class feedback, or out-of-classroom feedback? When I'm assessing student writing, is it in-classroom activity, or is it in-class feedback or out-of-class feedback? Now, if I have collected their pieces of writing, right, and assessed them on my own, and wrote a little message to my student and gave it back to my student, that will probably be out of classroom feedback, right? Because they might take their copybook with them and they might look through my comments. A very important thing which I will focus on in my in our further webinars, when you give feedback to student writing, you make sure and you decide to give it out of class, like outside the classroom, not in class. Please make sure that you find time or opportunity to approach the student and make sure that they're able to process all that you've written to them, right? All the information that you shared with them. Because very often, especially when it comes to teaching at school, they've just, the grade is all that matters. If like the more is written in there, the less interested they are, right? So make sure that you actually approach your student once again and make sure that they have understood all that you meant, right? Can you think of some examples of giving in-class feedback to student writing? Alexandra, it's not possible to feed a full feedback. Absolutely, it's not possible to feel full feedback in one lesson. Yeah, if we decide to focus on everything, it might take much longer. If I reflect on their previous work in class, that maybe is a. If I reflect on their previous work in class, that may be a delayed feedback. Now, it may be both. It may, if you are such a quick thinker, and when listening to your learner in real time, making references at the same time to their previous learning, if you know your learners so well, I'm not there yet, to be honest, and like you can think so quickly, you can actually do it in class, right? It can also be immediate feedback, but yeah, we reflect upon student previous learning when delivering out of classroom feedback, right, or delayed feedback, right? We take some time to process the information, absolutely. Now, going back to assessing writing, if I want, well, let's say, if they've written something in class, right, a paragraph, for example, when they're writing, they've just written, or there is one student who was the first to finish writing, I might approach them and say, well, that's okay, have a look here, here, and here, right? Think what can be done here to improve it a little bit better, right? This is what? This is my feedback. Is it immediate or delayed? It's immediate, right? But obviously, when it comes to assessing student writing, it's more likely to be delayed because it's impossible to approach every piece of writing right as they finish, right? So, but it can sometimes be immediate. Okay, thank you so much. Now, the type of feedback depends on who is the addressee, who is the one who receives our feedback, right? Again, if we're going back to that example of a speaking activity, if our learner, if they're doing some peer group work, follow-on discussion, free practice activity, and I've been monitoring them, and then I say, okay guys, thank you so much, just a couple of things I would like to pay your attention to, and I list the things that most of them kind of like need paying attention to. That will be group feedback, right? Because this is a group of students which receives my feedback, right? But research shows that the most effective feedback is actually individual feedback, right? We might sometimes want to give group feedback, but this is individual feedback which contributes to learning the most. This is something that we should always remember. Another way of classifying feedback is by the means of delivery of our feedback. Now, feedback can be oral, right? Can be delivered through us speaking to our learners, right? Again, if it's in-class feedback, it is more likely to be yeah. If it's in-class feedback, it's more likely to be oral, right? We just make oral comments, right? Even if it's their writing, I can just very quickly approach them and do it orally. But if it's if we're assessing their writing, it can be written feedback. Now, can we deliver written feedback on our students' speaking performance? Can we? Of course we can. It's a not very common occasion, but we can. For example, some teachers don't, but some teachers do practice asking their students to record their speaking tasks and send them to them, or they record their learners. Of course, you should ask their consent in class, right? And then assess them at home or out of the classroom, and you can actually write comments and send them to your learners, right? Rather than doing those one-on-one tutorials with your learners, right? You can mix and match, and of course you can record your feedback. You can do audio recording, or if you want, if you feel comfortable, you can record yourself and send them a little video of yourself giving feedback to them. I've never come across teachers doing that, but why not? This is a possibility. Okay, can you think of some other ways of delivering feedback to your students? That is a very interesting question, which I will ask you to think about while we're moving on, okay? Think of some other ways of how we can deliver feedback to our learners. Now, again, well, another type of, different types of, another kind of way to single out different types of feedback might be the amount of feedback delivered to our learners. Now, feedback can be really brisk, very brief, right? When I do not have, when it's inappropriate to focus, right, much on a specific or type of an assignment, right, a specific task, or I don't have time, maybe it's in class feedback, right? It can be very brisk, just maybe because at this stage it's very important that they get maybe the main strategies to take, right? Or like the main kind of points when it comes to how they can change a little bit their learning strategies, or like their the way that they're doing in classroom to help them do a certain assignment better, right? And it can be elaborate feedback, right? It can be very detailed feedback, very detailed, reasonably detailed feedback, right? Now, it's really important to, it can be a good idea to actually combine both in your interaction with learners. In-class feedback can be really brisk, can be quick. The main purpose of this feedback is just to, again, redirect your learners a little bit, guide them, right, to make sure that, well, monitor them and make sure that they do it in the way they should be doing, right, a certain task, for example. And elaborate feedback is something that you might put your thought into, right, devise, write a comment, or think thoroughly of what you want to include in it, right? And every once in a while, it's very important to give elaborate, personalized feedback to our learners. We're going to practice doing it in one of our subsequent webinars. Now, what are the problems with the ways these teachers give feedback to their learners? Right now, we are going to have a look at some real examples of feedback that, or these are actually not real examples of feedback, these are the comments that learners shared about their experience of receiving feedback from their teachers. And we're going to think together what the problem is and what can be done to change the situation, okay? So the first learner is Anne. She's 16 years old, and she says, "I'm really afraid to say something in class. When I try, the teacher doesn't say anything and immediately asks another student the very same questions. Sometimes she sighs, right? Sighs and rolls her eyes, right? So sometimes she tries to say something and the teacher like, next. So what is the problem here? Who is the one to cause problem? Anne, who keeps giving wrong answers, or the teacher who has chosen maybe a wrong, a not very good way of delivering feedback to the learner? What do you think is the problem? She just keeps sighing and rolling her eyes, right? When students don't give the right answers, and just like without comment, without giving any comment, she's like, next. Can you think who might be the one to blame in this situation? The teacher. Obviously, the teacher, right? Is the feedback that the teacher gives, what type of feedback, first of all? Is it in-class feedback? Obviously, it's in-class feedback. Is it motivating? Not really. The teacher should be flexible, and that's an aggressive way of giving feedback to a learner. There is a very high chance that this student at some point stops speaking at all. And I'm pretty sure that all of us or many of us have met students in our classroom who came to us from another class or school, and they have this thick barrier of speaking, right, which is very hard to break, right, and help them start speaking. Now, the reasons for that barrier might be different, but that might very well be one of the reasons. She just knows whatever she says, she is wrong, right? This is absolutely anti-motivating and too negative. Thank you so much. What can a teacher do in this way if, like, Anne keeps saying something wrong, right? What can we do? The teacher isn't respectful at all. Is this feedback constructive, and is it actually helpful? Probably not. Absolutely. Anne has no idea what's going wrong, right? She just knows that she's always wrong, right? What can we do? We might say thank you, right? But listen to, right? Maybe like invite them to listen to other ways of answering this question, right? Sometimes we might kind of welcome their contribution, right? And like in a very nice and gentle way, show that we doubt it a little bit, right? But still like show that their contribution matters, right? And switch onto a more some other, or say let's see what other students think about it. Thank you. We might thank them at least, right? Now, another problem. My teacher always tells me that I'm a very good student, but I keep getting bad marks on all my tests and assignments. I'm really confused. Now, Alex says that their teacher keeps saying that they're a very good student. If their teacher keeps saying that they're a very good student, what type of feedback is that? Ego involving or task involving? Yeah? So, they keep saying that they're doing great. They're a very good student, but when it comes to tests, when it comes to mock state exam, they're always underperform, right? What's the problem here? What do you think? Absolutely. Ilya, thank you so much. Going back to the previous example of feedback, we might thank our learner and invite them to listen to what other people have to say. Absolutely, Alexander. This is ego involving, right? Feedback. And what are other problems here? What other problem with this feedback can be detected? Is she genuine, or he? The teacher. Is the teacher genuine? Feedback should never be controversial. Feedback should be pretty explicit and understandable, right? And fair. Don't mislead your learners saying they're doing great if in fact they're not, right? Very good. So it's probably not very genuine, right? When you keep saying, good job, Alex. Good student, when in fact they are not. Maybe it's a lie, absolutely. This is something that we might stay away from, because it might result into our student having no clue what they're doing wrong and what they can do to improve, right? They simply don't take steps to improve their learning. And I have one more example of feedback. So, I wish our teacher took less time to mark our writing. I sometimes have to wait for weeks when the work comes back. I don't usually remember what it all was about. Sometimes the works never come back. So, what type of feedback is that? Probably delayed, right? Extremely delayed, overly delayed feedback, right? And it might result into our into our student actually forgetting what was going on. Lazy teacher, says Alexandra. Lazy teacher was in the previous comment, and lazy teacher here as well. A teacher procrastinator, right? Now, another very important characteristic here is that our feedback should be timely. Even if it's delayed feedback, it should still be timely. So it's actually relevant. Okay? All right. Now, may I ask you to share some maybe useful things that you have learned today, and that will really help me when preparing for my further webinars with you. And in our further webinars, we're going to focus on giving feedback when assessing student writing. We are going to acquire some strategies of how to correct students' linguistic mistakes. I have a kit of 6 different strategies which I'm going to share with you, and we're going to actually use those strategies during a webinar and correct some real pieces of student writing, and we're going to discuss different reasons why this or that strategy might be more appropriate for this or that piece of writing. Then we're going to focus on language teachers' professional reading skills needed when assessing student writing using assessment criteria. I'm going to share some strategies of how to use assessment criteria when assessing student writing. And we're going to practice writing comments to student writing. Okay, do we have anything? Okay, no oral feedback. Now, yeah, actually the primary focus of this series of webinars is written feedback. Written feedback when assessing student writing using assessment criteria. We're going to work with real estate exam essays. How to make shy students talk during the lesson. Very good. When to deliver feedback. Okay. I'm waiting for some things which you found particularly useful about this webinar. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for your contribution. You've mentioned a few things which I personally have never thought about. And this is something that I will definitely consider when preparing for my further webinars. And okay. I think that we will wait for some of your, now we're waiting for your feedback, right? And it was a pleasure working with you today, interacting, communicating with you today. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll see you in my next webinar.